Last time we talked about how wines are made. The key ingredient in making wine is grapes. Then it has to fermented, and for a period, depending on the type of wine, for a period, and then we get the different styles of wine. Among the different styles of wine, we had table wines, we had fortified wines, aromatized wines. Now today, we look at a special class of wine which we call the sparkling wine. So I'm going to share a screen here. So if you don't hear me, just say. Do you see anything on my screen?
No.
Do you see anything? Do you see anything on my screen? I mean, from your side.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So
Yes.
last time we looked at how red wines and white wines are made. So today we look at a special type of wine, which is called sparkling wine. Now, if there is a wine that is equated with celebration, romance, luxury, and decadence, it is sparkling wine. Now, many years ago, they thought it was a fault. The sparkling aspect actually came to be accepted as special, delightful characteristics. One thing we have to note is that it takes an extra effort to make the sparkling wine, and the effort is rewarded by, when you look at the wine's place of prestige in the consumer's eye, it is at the top. I think you have previously opened bottles of sparkling wine. Am I right? Am I right? I know you are. Yeah? Timothy,
Nam.
you've opened these bottles of sparkling wine.
Of course, many.
There is one that is readily available in the market. It's called Shamdo. Yeah?
Shamblo, yes.
You realize the sparkle in it, those bubbles. Yeah?
Yes. Can you hear it them?
Yeah, now it is different from the other red wines. If you will tell a difference, yeah? So it makes it more different and special. Now, sparkling wine, as we know today, is based on several old wines. Before the 17th century in France, sparkling wine used to be considered as a fault. So they used to maybe spill it, throw it. It was not wine at all. So it was not until later, in the mid 1600s, when sparkling wine started to be extremely popular. People loved the fault in it. They made it and even drank more and more casks of this sparkling wine. There's one person that we have to mention that played a great role in making sparkling wine and in making it reach the place where it is. That person is called Dom Perignon. He was the first contributor to the Champagne story. This person was commissioned by his monastic order to go to the village of Haute Villas in Champagne. You've heard about the monastery. where men serve God there. They serve God, they live in holy lives, and that is what they do. So this monastic order sent one Dom Perignon to a village of haute villas in Champagne. He created Champagne tradition. So this is the father of Champagne. Now, Perignon took what is grown in the region and tried to make the best wine from this. The area around the haute villas and much of Champagne region grew this great grape we call Pinot Noir. Now, the tradition of growing Pinot Noir dated back to the 13th century. Now, the reason why we are actually trying to say that Dom Perignon developed this, he gave guidelines toward the making of champagne and sparkling wine, and these are the rules. We have several rules which Perignon laid down to making top quality wine. First, he restricted the making of sparkling wine and generally, specifically champagne, to Pinot Noir. You are to use only Pinot Noir. Now, second, the vines were pruned very small and yields were kept low. That was the second rule according to Dom Perignon. And the third rule is this: the harvest had to be very delicate. The grapes were not to be bruised or the skins broken in any way. So that was the third rule. The fourth rule is that the grapes were not to be tread to press the juice, nor were the skins to remain in contact with the juice. There was to be no extraction of color. Essentially, the wine made was a white wine from the juice of red grapes. These are the rules according to Dom Perignon, who was sent to the village of haute villas in Champagne with a certain order to carry out. Now, this is how Dom Perignon came to discover Champagne. No matter how hard he tried, he could not eliminate the sparkle from the wine, nor could he prevent the market from demanding more and more of that wine each year. Eventually, the wine was placed into the bottles in the winter, and the corks wired into the place to prevent them from being pushed out of the bottle. There's one thing you have to note. These sparkling wines and generally champagne, when you open them, they come up with some pop sound due to some build-up pressure inside. So that is why Dom Perignon used to wire those corks inside to prevent these from actually pushing out of the bottle. So champagne, long abandoned since the Romans stopped, the old chalk caves of the Champagne, which had been abandoned since the Romans stopped using the chalk for building, became storehouses for this wine. Now, bottle making at that time was achieved through hand blowing individual bottles. Each bottle was different and had minor flaws. Once pressure built inside the bottle, if a flow failed, the bottle could explode. You can see how making sparkling wine was even more dangerous at that time. So once again, I'm trying to make you see that built up pressure in those bottles. Now, before we mention a second person who was called Madame Veuve Clicquot, we have to acknowledge the work of one Dom Perignon, the first contributor to the Champagne story, who was sent to the village of haute villas by his monastic order. He came up with a set of rules, and one of the rules said you have to use Pinot Noir, the grape variety, in making sparkling wine and top quality wine, among other groups, among other rules. The second person who contributed to the making of champagne was Veuve Clicquot. Now, by the 18th century, the development of bottles improved in making the glass stronger and clearer. Remember the pressure that comes with that comes inside those champagne bottles or sparkling wine bottles. So by the 18th century, things were much more improved. Now, the reason was not most of the region's wine production was still cheap red wine. Now, the reason was that the champagne vintages were inconsistent. Anyone who had tasted a good bottle knew the heights the wines could achieve, but those bottles were few and far between, not to mention that they were expensive. So enter somebody we call Veuve Clicquot, Madame Veuve Clicquot, who actually took champagne to the next level from where Dom Perignon had left it. This person inherited a winery at the age of 27 when her husband passed away. She also inherited methods and systems that had been in place for years. She was a very astute businesswoman and proceeded to introduce changes to the making of champagne that would revolutionize the industry. Now, the major issue that still remained at hand was the issue of sediment. Every bottle of champagne contained sediment. This needed to be removed before the wine could be sold. So in the winery, if the winery tried to make a wine that was more appealing to the consumer, and which is even more sweeter, it just settled in more sediment. The prevailing technology involved tapping and twisting. So Veuve Clicquot had to do something. In the early 1800s, in the cellars of Veuve Clicquot, a new system was developed. In this system, rather than collect the sediment in the smallest area of the side of the bottle, the sediment was directed to settle on the cork. This involved twisting and tapping the bottles, with the sediment slowly being directed to the neck of the bottle. So we can cut a long story short and say this woman, Veuve Clicquot, actually came up with a system, a new system that did away with the issue of the sediment that used to settle at the bottom and interfere with the quality of the wine. So that is how we appreciate the work of Veuve Clicquot. Now, that is all we need to know about these two people, Dom Perignon and Veuve Clicquot. So that brings us to something else. How is champagne made? Champagne is made in a different way from the other red wines and steel table wines, white wines, and others. It is special category. So we want to see how this is made. The process to make champagne has not changed much since Dom Perignon and Veuve Clicquot affected some of the procedures. Now, this process is called, in French, method traditional. In English, we can just say traditional method. It has been accepted around the world and as the method of making top quality sparkling wines. Some viticultural practices may differ around the world, but the winemaking technique is still the same. And champagne is made through what we call the method champenoise or method traditional. In English, that's traditional method. Now, this was the original term used to describe the champagne making technology. The shift away from the usage began with the protection of the name champagne. Now, because of its popularity, champagne is often used to describe any sparkling wine. Now, one thing, champagne is a sparkling wine, but not all sparkling wines are champagne. Champagne is a quality. Hello? Are we still together? Are we still together? Hello? So, once again, champagne is a sparkling wine, but not all sparkling wines are champagne. So at the end, we shall see the difference between those two. Now, the French profess that only sparkling wine from the Champagne region should be called champagne. So we also have other sparkling wines outside the Champagne region. They are not champagne. They come by other names. So as the use of champagne to describe a particular wine became a more accepted practice, the French insisted that even the name of the process should be restricted to the Champagne region as well. In difference to the tradition of champagne, wines now made by the method use names reflecting the tradition without naming the regional origin. Now, wines made in this manner are labeled. Those made in Italy, they are called Metodo Classico. So they are sparkling wines made through the Champagne method, but they are not from Champagne in France. So we call them Metodo Classico. In Spain, they come by the name Metodo Tradicional. So they call Sava. In the United States and the Australia, we just call it traditional method. In the United States, we also have fermented in these bottles. So we have bottles labeled or written that this type of wine has been made and is fermented in this bottle. So something that makes champagne one more different again is that it undergoes secondary fermentation in the bottle. That's why you see some of it is identified as fermented in the bottle. Viticulture. Now, viticulture, this is a process of cultivating wines. Because champagne is different, its viticulture is also going to be a bit different. Now, the grapes used to make champagne are a combination of black and white grapes. The black grapes are Pinot Noir, and the white ones are Pinot Meunier. So don't forget this. So Dom Perignon only set the rules for Pinot Noir. He never mentioned Pinot Meunier. But the world has moved. Technology has come. People have known how to make things. So Pinot Meunier was added to making champagne. So black grapes and white grapes. The black grapes are Pinot Noir. The white ones are Pinot Meunier. So the white grape is a Chardonnay. So no, we have these two grapes which are black, Pinot Meunier and Pinot Noir. Those are the black grapes. And then we have a white grape which is Chardonnay. So Chardonnay is added on to those three to make champagne. Now in Champagne, the growing of those grapes tend to be split into smaller regions. Chardonnay is now grown in the region called Côte des Blancs, while Pinots are grown in Vallée de la Marne, mostly Pinot Meunier, and Montage de Reims, which is mostly Pinot Noir. So these vineyards are classified, which we won't see. Now, champagne houses do not grow the majority of their own grapes. Rather, the house depend on approximately 19,000 growers to tend the grapes, and from whom they can also buy the grapes. Now, harvest is done by hand with the tight spacing of the vines in place. take 500 to 550 man-hours to harvest 1 hectare of land. Typically, Champagne sees its population grow by 10,000 workers during the 2-week harvest period. The grapes are then taken to the press houses that have been set up in each village. It would be too dangerous to attempt to take the grapes back to champagne houses for processing. Rather, batches of grapes are pressed in the closest village, and the resulting juice is then sent by tanker truck to the appropriate producer. So, we have talked about the black grapes and the white grapes that are used to make champagne. You have to be specific about those grapes. Vinification, the process of making wine. So pressing. The first step of the vinification process is to press the juice. The grapes are pressed in wide, shallow basket presses. Now, the first extraction of juice is in what we call the free-run juice, which comes from just the pressure of the grapes due to the gravity. Then the next step is called the cuvee. Between each pressing, the grapes are loosened and turned into pitchforks, turned with pitchforks. Then we have the third press, which is called the tie. A fourth press may occur, but this is not used for champagne either, as it is considered too rough and harsh for the delicate wine. So we have presses up to 4 of them. And then the yield of grapes is controlled for the growers. Now the juice is then allowed to settle and clarify. After pressing, now we go into what we call fermentation. Fermentation is a tedious process. Like, for this juice, very tedious. Each grape variety is fermented separately. Each vineyard fermented separately. Each pressing also fermented separately. This will provide each champagne house a variety of wines that will be used to create the blend later on. You can see, very tedious. Each grape, if it is black grape, separate from the white one. Even Pinot Noir, separate from the Pinot Meunier. And if you have got two different vineyards from which you source your wine, then they are not fermented the same. Now, fermentation methodology will depend on the champagne house. This begins the process of distinguishing the house style. Some producers use stainless steel tanks, while others will use large old oak barrels. Occasionally, a producer will use small oak barrels, but not new ones. So that's where we ferment them. We have a method called assemblage. Now, this step is the key to a champagne house consistency. Assemblage, which translates to blending, is the job of the chef de cave, or somebody we call in English the blender. The chef is responsible for mixing different wines together to create a wine that matches the house styles. The wines include the current vintage, which is separated by the vineyard and grape variety, as well as the older reserves wines from those very good years. The chef must take into consideration not only the balance of the wine when blended, but how it will taste after the second fermentation. The skill required is honorable. Not only must the blender make a wine that is well balanced, other words, assemblage has happened. So what is next after assemblage? Secondary fermentation, or what we call second fermentation. Now, before the wine is placed in bottles, it needs to be prepared in order to undergo a secondary fermentation. Some of the wine is separated from the main batch and blended with sugar and yeast. It is then blended back together in inoculating the whole batch of wine with yeast and food. Now, this is called the liqueur de tirage. The amount of sugar needs to be very precise and usually amounts to raising the alcohol level of the wine by about 1.2 to around 1.3. This is also enough to create a minimum of 6 atmospheres of pressure. Now, that's why when you open that bottle, it pops, it comes out without pressure. So 6 atmospheres of pressure, about 90 to 96 pounds per square inch in the bottle. The bottles are capped with brown caps, preventing any loss of carbon dioxide, which dissolves back into the wine. The choice of yeast is very important and is used to produce the second fermentation. It is not the same yeast that fermented the grape juice into the still wine. You must remember that. First, the condition of the bottle require a different strain. The yeast chosen now must be able to withstand high pressure of carbon dioxide and must also exist in elevated alcoholic condition and must ferment at a lower temperature and sugar level. So another very important consideration is this. What happens to the yeast after the fermentation is complete? So that's a question. The yeast must perform 2 functions after the fermentation. It must clump easily and not stick to the side of the bottle. It also must provide beneficial flavors to the yeast cell after as the yeast cells decompose. Now, the newly capped bottles are placed in the cellar to ferment a second time and also to age. The cellars are about 10 to 13 degrees centigrade, much cooler than the first fermentation. The second fermentation will take from 14 days to 4 months, and the quality of the bubbles is directly related to the amount of time allowed for the second fermentation. The finer and more delicate the bubbles at the end of the second fermentation, the higher the quality of the wine. So, just to round that out, we need what? We need another fermentation. And for that to happen, we must prepare the wine to undergo that second fermentation in the bottle. How do we do that? We must blend it with sugar and yeast. Now, this sugar and yeast and that condition created in the bottle creates what we call an atmosphere, which, according to the method of making champagne or method champenois, it must be upward of 6 atmospheres in the bottle. And then we cap it. Remember, we need a different strain of yeast that will do well, because there is high chance the pressure, the yeast strain is going to be different because the pressures are high here, and also the alcoholic conditions are much higher. So the ones we used in the first fermentation is not going to work in the secondary fermentation. So we have done the second fermentation, sometimes in the bottle, sometimes in the cask or the barrel. Now we enter another stage, which is called aging. The wine bottles are left stacked sur la tête or horizontal for a minimum of 15 months in Champagne. Other regions have different minimum times, which will be discussed in the later chapter. During this time, the effects of secondary fermentation are integrated into the wine. The carbon dioxide that was there is dissolving into the wine, and the carbonic acid it produces helps with some of the aging reactions. Also, during this time, the yeast that died after fermentation begins to decompose. Cells walls burst open in a process called autolysis. So that is how we age wines horizontally. Let's look at something here. Modern riddling innovations. Now, in an effort to make the riddling process easier, several techniques have been tested to make not only riddling easier, but the removal of the yeast. The first is the development of machine called a gyropalette to riddle multiple bottles at a time. To use a gyropalette, the bottles are placed in a large crate that holds about 500 bottles. We have less mechanical methods, which include addition of the bottle when the yeast and the sugar are added. We have inert substances like bentonite, isinglass, or commercial products, which can also be used to give a more consistent substrate on which the lees will settle and for ease of riddling. Now, we have aged this champagne in horizontal position. We have aged them in horizontal position. So what happens in the next stage? This is what happens. We have to remove the yeast. So a good bottle of bubbly has no trace of the yeast that caused the secondary fermentation. Now, because champagne is sold in the same bottle as that of the second fermentation, the yeast has to be removed. This process is the one we were mentioning above. It's called riddling or remoage. The process involves getting the lees to the neck of the bottle or removing the bottles from sour lattice, that's horizontal position, and getting them to a vertical position, which we call sour point. So a lees is just a machine that we take to the neck of the bottle to remove this excess yeast that we don't need. We also have a traditional hand method which takes anywhere from 2 to 10 weeks, typically 6 weeks. There are lots of variables that determine the time, like how decomposed and fine the yeast has become. So this is even much more different and difficult because it takes a lot of time and more effort. We have got machines that do this. Now, we have removed the yeast. We could use a machine or we could do it by hand. The next step is what we'll call disgorging. Disgorging is a process that occurs after the lees have moved to the neck of the bottle. It's called gorgement in French. Disgorging involves removal of the crown cap, and with it, plugs of lees that have been settled on the cap. Now, the first step is chilling the bottles below freezing, that is below around -4. This helps to retain the carbon dioxide in solution, but it also is called stabilization of the wine, precipitating any tartrate crystals. So disgorging is a more technical term, more technical process. We won't get into it. We just have to know it by that name. That's what happens at that stage. So the wine that is added to replace that is lost when the frozen plug is spelled is called the liquor, the expedition or dosage. This wine could be some reserved blend if the final product is to be completely devoid of sugar. So let's look at the basic steps in the method traditional or the method champenois, which is used in making the sparkling wine. So the first step, we have got newly made wines and some reserve wines. They are sent to the cuvee, and here we add what we call the liquor de tirage, and we bottle them in bottles. After the bottling, we have to riddle. Riddle, remember, is removing the yeast. So after the riddling, we disgorge. Disgorging means what? We have to add, because some of the wine has been lost, so we have to add that, and that is what's called dosage before we bottle and sell this wine. Final steps in making champagne. After addition of the dosage, the champagne is sealed with a cork. The cork used is a modified agglomerate cork. The majority of the cork structure is agglomerated. Agglomeration means some glass which is hardened in one way or the other. But two thin slices of solid cork are placed at the end that will come into contact with the wine. Now, the cork themselves are wider than the bottleneck. I think you can remember that, and are straight plugs to start. Once they are placed in the bottle, the cork is wired in a place with a cage, which also contains what we call a placket or a metal button. The placket is on top of the cork to prevent the wire cutting into the cork, and also to identify the producer and prevent fraud. The pressure of the gas on the cork and the presence of the cage creates the iconic mushroom-shaped cork that is associated with the champagne. The wine is not quite ready for the market yet. It will typically be aged another 3 months before it is released. Now, the traditional aging is time for the dosage flavors to marry the flavors of the wine. Remember, in dosage, we use those new wines and ones from the reserve. So you have to let it merge together to create that good flavor. Now, the 3 months is minimum amount of time, and some producers will allow this period to last up to even a year. So this is not a typical bottling period. With the presence of higher pressure inside the bottle, no oxygen is migrating through the cork. The standard bottling aging flavors are not developed in this period. So let's look at the other sparkling wine production methods. We've looked at the traditional method. So what are the others? Now, before we look at the others, there are two aspects of method traditional that makes it difficult to create, and even it makes it difficult to create more inexpensive sparkling wines. The aging and the riddling. When you get those two processes in the stage, the wines that you make have to be expensive because of the effort and the manpower. For some sparkling wines, shorter, easier methods have been devised to make wines that sparkle without some of the expense. Now, initially, the attempt was to maintain the quality of method traditional wine, but some of the new methods do not maintain that complexity. The first method is the transfer method. This is the same as for method traditional until the riddling step. The wines are blended to form the cuvee. The wine is inoculated with sugar and yeast and then placed into bottles. So, the riddling step is not here. It is replaced by a pressurized transfer of the wine into a large tank. Somebody asked a question. Can you tell by looking at the wine if it is aged? You won't just tell, but you look at the color. Telling us, looking at it is not enough. You have to smell, you have to taste it, you have to sip it and smell it. So that is not enough to tell if it is aged. There was a question somebody was going to type. At the cuvee, we are blending the wine. Remember, we need a chef de cuvee who is going to blend the wine. Some old reserves and the new wine to create a perfect flavored wine. We continue. The transfer method, same as the traditional method, but the difference is at the riddling stage, which is not there in the transfer method. We have the tank method, which was developed by a French chemist called Eugène Chamat. Sometimes we refer to it as the Chamat method in his honor, or as the cuvee clos method. This method differs significantly from the method traditional, not only in the methodology, but also in the characteristics of the final product. One thing, it is very inexpensive process and makes very inexpensive sparkling wine. The first difference is this: the types of grapes used to make a sparkling wine via the tank method. The grapes often have little varietal character and often grown with large yields and harvested before peak ripeness. These grape varieties include the Colombard, overcropped Chenin Blanc, and Sylvaner. Wine is made from these grapes and is then transferred to large tanks where the secondary fermentation will occur. So the grapes, one difference. We have the carbonation method. Now the final method is simple and not commonly used in wines for commercial release, but it still needs us to mention it. The method is called direct carbonation, or for a French flair, pompe by cyclette. As is suggested by the name, there is no secondary fermentation in these wines. They are carbonated through the introduction of carbon dioxide into the still wine. These wines seem like a soft drink with large bubbles that So we have three other methods besides the traditional method. And these are secondary fermentation, meaning fermentation happens twice. We have other sparkling wine. Remember, champagne has to happen twice. I mean, the fermentation has to be twice. But we have other sparkling wines where fermentation happens only once. One is called the Ancestral Method, Method Ancestral. The method, so this is under single fermentation sparkling wines. So the Ancestral Method is a style. The method Ancestral style is found in the south of France, in the region of Limoux, Gaillac, and Savoie. The gist of the process is to bottle the young wine before all the sugar has been fermented. Another method is called Asti Production. Asti Spumante and Moscato di Asti are sweet sparkling wines from the Piedmont region of Italy. They use a modified tank method of production. So part of the objective of a modified tank method of production is to retain the natural sweetness while creating carbonation. The standard tank method now pressurized tanks for the secondary fermentation, while in Asti, the tanks are used for the primary fermentation. So we finish by looking at what we call sparkling wine styles. So many variables go into making sparkling wines. The variation creates different styles, some determined early in the process and others later on. Each sparkling wine house will make different styles, creating a portfolio of wines that they hope will serve a wide segment of the market. So the first style of sparkling wine is non-vintage. Now, non-vintage, 80% of all sparkling wine produced does not possess a vintage date. So this is the result of choice of the assemblage stage. In order to make a wine that is consistent from year to year and maintain the house style, the blender will utilize reserve wines or wines from previous vintages. So the result is a wine that does not have specific date, no vintage date. That's what we call non-vintage. The second style is a house. We have house styles. Now, champagne and sparkling wine houses create the basic style to be consistent from year to year. We have some houses that have been doing this. We've been creating, and their styles of sparkling are quite different from one another. So you can tell those big differences between the houses. And some of these houses include, we have Perignon and Taittinger, which make light, elegant wines. The wines are usually made with a high proportion of Chardonnay. Other houses make more full-bodied and yeasty wines, to include Bollinger and Veuve Clicquot and Croge. So that's the second style, house. Vintage. Now, vintage sparkling wine is made from the harvest of a single year, just as in table wine. No more than 80% of year's harvest can become vintage. So a vintage is a wine that possesses the identity of a single year. That's the opposite of a non-vintage. Cuvée de prestige. Every sparkling wine house makes a top-of-the-line called wine. These wines are made from the best grapes, from the best vineyards. They can be made in non-vintage form, but are often the very best when they are vintage wines. The wines are made by the traditional methods, with the wines fermented in some barrels, sealed with corks for the second fermentation, and hand-disgorged. Some of the most famous Cuvée de Prestige are Crystal, which is produced by Roderer. Dom Perignon is produced by a house called Moët et Chandon. and La Grande Dame, which is produced by the house Veuve Clicquot, a tribute to Veuve Clicquot. So, Prestige, Cuvée de Prestige, the most quality sparkling wine, top of the line wine we have. Then another style is called Blanc de Blancs, which with your knowledge in French, this translates to white white from whites. Yeah, translated as white from whites. These wines are made from 100% Chardonnay. They are considered the wines that have the greatest potential for aging and also need aging to develop a full spectrum of flavors. Then we have Blanc de Nose, which translates to white from black, or Blanc de Nose. They possess no Chardonnay, but rather are made from the juice of two black grapes, Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier alone. These wines may or may not have a slight tinge of color, depending upon how delicately the grapes were pressed. Blanc de Noirs is not a common style in Champagne, though it can be easily found made in California for producers. We have Rosé. Now, Rosé is pink champagne. Now, pink champagne and sparkling wines are made by a method different than making still rosés. To make a rosé, sparkling wine houses make a small amount of red, which is still Pinot Noir. That wine is then used to color the blend that will become the rosé. Depending on the color desired, up to 15% of the final wine could come from the red Pinot Noir wine. Rosé sparkling wines are specialty items, not made by every house, though those that do not make them often have non-vintage, vintage, and Cuvée de Prestige levels available. So, those were the wine styles, sparkling wine styles. We have different levels of sweetness in wines. Brut nature, we have extra brut, the brut, extra sec or extra dry, demi-sec, and doux. So in Europe, demi-sec is often labeled with doux is the style of the Russian Caesars and is no longer commercially produced. That is the sweetness test. So grams of sugar per liter from 0 to 3, and then we can have even much more, which is 50 plus grams, 50 grams of sugar per liter. That's sweet. So, bottle styles. Are we together? Are we together? Okay. So, let's look at the bottle styles. The smallest is called a split, about 187 milliliters. Then we have a half a bottle. Now 375, that is the size of that small soda bottle. So you can imagine we have even a smaller amount, half of that small bottle of soda, which is 187 ml. We call it a split. Then a bottle, as a standard, 750 ml. Most wines come in this category. We can also have a magnum, which is 1.5 liter. So that's 2 bottles in one magnum. Jeroboam, 3 liters. That is 4 bottles. If our standard is 750, then this is 4 bottles. Rehoboam, 6 bottles. Methuselah, 8. Salmanazar, 12. Balthazar, 16. And Nebuchadnezzar, 20. So if you multiply 1.5 by 20, that's almost 30 liters. That's a Nebuchadnezzar bottle, very big. So anything that is made outside Champagne is a non-Champagne. So we have those sparkling wines that are made outside the Champagne region. So those made in France, in the south of France, we have sparkling wines made via method traditional. Examples of those include Claret, the traditional, and Blanquet, the Limour. In Spain, we also have sparkling wines made in this way. They're called Sauvage. In Italy, they are called Prosecco. And the first, there's also Asti Spumanti and Moscato di Asti. Then Prosecco. So Prosecco, very popular. And besides Asti Spumanti and Moscato di Asti. In Germany, sparkling wine made through the method traditional is called sect. And then we have United States, where we have New York and California. The sparklers from New York vary in their production. Some large producers make sparkling wines from a blend of native and vinifera varieties. And we have a few European investors in California sparkling wine. We have Mom Napa, so California winery, and the European investor. So Mom Napa is a European investor in the Napa Valley, California. We have Domaine Chandon from the house Moët Chandon. We have Piper Hidsik, which is found in Piper, Sonoma. Fry Zenith in Gloria Ferra, and Rodera in Rodera Estate, and Titingia, which is in Domaine Caneros. Australia, we cannot complete this without mentioning Australia also, which has also an investment from Moët Chandon. So Australia is a mirror to California, with good quality producers making traditional method sparkling wines. So summary, let's summarize this. Sparkling wine is a labor intensive, if you remember that. It has a special place in the world of wine. Today you want to celebrate, then the celebration is not complete if there's no sparkling wine. There has to be, you heard the word, the phrase, put the champagne on ice. So wine with bottles, with bubbles is a favorite for a romantic evening or for a celebration. The best wine take their model from champagne and use the method traditional to make wines that are yeasty, nutty, and delicately sparkling. These wines come from France, Italy, Spain, and the United States, or even Australia. Other methods have been devised to reduce the time and the expense of making sparkling wines. You remember them? We have the tank method, the transfer method, and the carbonation method, because method traditional is very expensive. And then some of these produce inexpensive sparklers from neutral grapes. So besides champagne, besides Chardonnay, we also have other grapes. If you remember, the Colombard, those can also be used. No matter the expense, sparkling wine still carries the mystique of romance and luxury. So key items, key terms. Hello? If you're still there, this is what I want you to do. Find the meaning of these words. Pouvez close, pompe bicyclette, method Ancestral reserve wine, and then you will send them. You will send them at the end of this class. How many are you there? Okay, let me copy and attach it. So, do we have a question? I'm going to copy and attach. Now you'll find these attached in that topic. The topic 6. So I've added a document there. Can I read again?
Yes, you can read again.
Okay, let me post it there. I'm going to type it. You can see it. Discuss the pros and cons of the transfer method in relation to the method traditional. Jacqueline. Jacqueline. Jacqueline.
Yes.
Compare and contrast the two most common methods of riddling. Kennedy. Tell us, why is gentle pressing of the grapes important for sparkling wine production? Robinson, discuss the
Yes.
effect of aging. Discuss the effect of aging on the profile, on the flavor profile of champagne.
Pardon.
Who is that? Identify yourself. Robin, discuss the effect of aging on the flavor profile of champagne. Esther, how does Asti Spumante production differ from champagne production? How does Asti Spumante production differ from champagne production? Vet. Is it vet?
Yes.
Outline the styles of sparkling wines. I'm going to send you a book. I'll attach it here, upload it. Actually, not a book, just a section of the book where you'll find this information. Hello? Hello?
Yes. Hello.
Now I've attached, I've
Excuse me.
uploaded that book. You'll find it there in topic 6. We are coming back shortly, some minutes to 4. We'll make it 3:40. So 3:40 we will take the attendance. We'll take the register. Is everybody there? Hello?
Yes.
Yes.
So we're coming back at 3:40. So make sure you have got that work ready.
Okay.
Yeah?
Okay. Yeah.
So check the book there.